Services. And we'd like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon. We have a wonderful presentation today with one of our registered dietitians here at Wood Services, Michael Wootson. He will be presenting on eating with ease, nutrition for busy moms and children with ASD. So we are going to allow Michael to get started in a couple minutes. Just so everybody knows, for Wellness Wednesdays in this webinar, we will have everybody muted and cameras off. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will allow for questions throughout the presentation. There are a couple of great interactive slides that we'd like you to participate via chat, and we will be asking you to do that at that time. And if you have anything else, please go ahead and put it in the chat. We also ask that you put your name and affiliation in the chat if you'd like, so that we do know who is participating today. This webinar will be recorded and then sent out to all of our participants after the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Michael Woodson to get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Lisa, and thank you everybody for being here in attendance. We have a very good presentation planned. So like Lisa mentioned, we're going to have some opportunities for interaction. So we definitely want to encourage good questions if you guys have any. So today we will be going over strategies to help support individuals, children specific with autism spectrum disorder, with promoting overall nutritional balance and also nutritional variety with what they're having to eat. During the second half of the presentation, we are going to discuss ways that busy moms could better meet their own health and wellness needs. As a lot of you are probably familiar, generally when you're taking care of children, it's very easy to have their needs kind of overshadow your own needs. So we're going to find some ways to better meet both sides of the fence. Okay. So a little about me and my background. I am a registered dietitian and a licensed dietitian nutritionist. What that is it's an individual who completed an undergraduate degree from an accredited university. A registered dietitian also has to complete 1,200 hours of supervised practice. And recently, there's also a master's degree requirement. So we have to have a lot of training before we start practicing. I graduated from LaSalle University in 2016, so I'm not sure if there's any LaSalle University alumni, but that's where I went to school. I also completed my coordinated program the year after I graduated at LaSalle as well. I have a lot of experience working with a lot of different populations over my years of practice. One of the bigger populations being specifically pediatric individuals with autism spectrum disorder. So I'm very familiar with some of the challenges that this group faces. Aside from that, I also have a lot of experience working with adults specifically. In my practice, I've worked with a diverse background of different health conditions, different walks of life. And through practice, we've discussed health and wellness, weight loss, inflammation, diabetes, hypertension, and more. So the overview for today's presentation, first and foremost, we want to explore some nutrition-focused areas for children with autism spectrum disorder. Like I mentioned, one of the difficult areas in this population is increasing food variety and food intake. So in this presentation, we're going to review some strategies on how we could better support increasing food variety overall. During the second half, we're going to discuss some strategies on how busy moms can make nutrition work better for their own health and wellness goals. And like we mentioned earlier, there are going to be some opportunities for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, we definitely encourage you to give the questions. So what are the nutritional goals for children with autism spectrum disorder? So first and foremost, we want to take an approach that is supporting optimal performance of the brain and the body. During this lifestyle age group, you have a lot of growth, physical, and also cognitive. You also have a lot of development. So we want to ensure that we're providing adequate calories to support these goals. Oftentimes, again, like it's a very stressful situation where you might have a child who has a selective number of foods they're having, and you're concerned about the variety of their diet. But first and foremost, if they are eating, if they're getting adequate calories, that's a major win. So we definitely want to consider that. We also want to take into consideration different nutrients that we have to focus on incorporating into the diet pertaining to this group specifically. So calcium and vitamin D, this is more so important for bone growth and bone health. Aside from that, some other key nutrients, we're thinking about zinc, iron, magnesium. A lot of these are very important for cognitive development and just growth overall. We also want to consider, are we taking a good strategy to promote increased fiber and increased fluids in the diet? With that, you tend to have better digestion, better gut health symptoms. So something to consider. And finally, we want to take a strategy that's increasing overall food variety. So when you have more variety with the foods that you're accepting, you are going to have more of a balance of the macronutrients that we have to make sure we're getting in. So that's specifically protein, carbohydrates, and dietary fats. So what are some common eating challenges with this population? So first and foremost, autism spectrum disorder is linked with a condition called oral oversensitivity. Essentially what this is it's an abnormal immune response when food enters the mouth. It could promote inflammation. It could promote feelings of discomfort within this population. And that act in itself can translate into a lot of foods being avoided and having like a set number of foods that are accepted. So that's very common with this population. So in turn, individuals tend to have extreme food likes and food dislikes. So you'll see that maybe your child will have 3 items that they like to eat, and that's the only item that they want for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then on your end, when you're trying to increase the variety and just introduce your children to different foods, it's very difficult for them to stray away from what they're familiar with. So again, during the presentation, we're gonna go over some strategies to help bridge those gaps better. Another eating challenge is just difficulty focusing overall. So when you're thinking about the process of eating, for individuals without this condition, we don't really give it much thought. You could be on your phone and go through your meal and just have everything play out how it plays out. But with this population specifically, a lot of individuals can have increased anxiety. It could be stressful, and adding in distract process. So we absolutely want to consider when we're the environment for our children to eat, are we making sure to eliminate many distractions as possible? Because again, we have too many distractions, and that will directly influence the nutritional intake overall. And lastly, constipation, something that's very common within this population. And this is generally a result of lack of fiber, suboptimal food intake, lower activity, and movement. So again, things to consider. So how can we make this process that's very stressful as possible and have this process be more conducive towards success? We're thinking about, again, limiting distractions. You also want to consider, how can I help build a routine? How can I help create familiarity and have an individual know what to expect during certain times of the day to make that eating process that much easier? So some examples of this, maybe having a designated eating time for lunch, dinner, and breakfast. So 12 o'clock, your child can expect to have lunch around that time. Maybe snack is around 3 p.m., dinner is around 5 or 6. Again, just helping to build that routine so they know what to expect. They're not getting caught off guard, which again could lead to anxiety and decreased success. You also want to see if you can have some type of buy-in from your child. So maybe if everyone is sitting at the dinner table, giving your child the opportunity to pick what seat at the table that they're going to sit at. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't seem like a lot, but again, since you're creating buy-in on their end, you're just increasing the likelihood of eating going a lot better. What is very stressful for individuals with this population is just the idea of new foreign foods. Like we mentioned before, oral oversensitivity. They're not sure if this food is going to be good, if they feel it's going to be harmful to them. It's a very stressful process. So some ways we could decrease the stress and again, better bridge those gaps is thinking about ways of introducing the food outside the kitchen, outside of meal times. So just some ideas of how you can accomplish that. Say you're going to the grocery store and maybe you're thinking of a new food you want your child to try. Maybe you're bringing your child to a section of the produce, picking out a new fruit that they've never had before, and you're just giving them the opportunity to feel the fruit, look at the fruit, assess the fruit, smell the fruit. Just build that familiarity so when they're introduced with that food at mealtime, it's not the first time they're seeing that item. Another good idea is if you buy a book and you tend to learn more about the food item with your child, again, like you're just getting them more accustomed to this new item, just understanding that this might be something that they could add to their general nutritional intake. So essentially just being very creative about building comfort prior to the eating process and making sure these foods are as familiar as possible. So when we're thinking about the process of introducing new foods to a child's diet, again, oftentimes within this population, individuals will have a select number of items that they're used to having. And if they're introduced to something that's drastically different from what they're used to having, it tends to be very anxiety inducing. So a good strategy, a good approach to help bridge off the number of foods that your child will accept, but also make the process a little more streamlined, make it a little more easier for both parties is a process called food chaining. What this process is essentially is you are gradually replacing foods that are quote unquote safe, that they're familiar with foods that are more foreign. So oftentimes parents can find themselves in a situation where you might want your child to try this new vegetable, maybe it's tomatoes, and maybe they're used to having broccoli. So every time that you introduce tomatoes at the dinner table, your child doesn't accept it, they push the food away. It's not a very productive experience. The reason why that's not a productive experience is, again, it's too much of a departure from what they're familiar with and what you're trying to introduce. So again, this food chaining process helps bridge the gaps of the distinct food items. So you're essentially building off of qualities that your child is familiar with when it comes to food. So if you know that your child likes a specific texture, a specific color, a specific taste, a specific temperature, a specific shape, we're using that as the starting point to help build our bridge and help to chain to new food items. So a food chain is essentially a small jump from an item that you're starting off with to an item you want to get to. Oftentimes, this could be as simple as changing the brands of the fries that your child is used to having. Still the same item, but it's introducing like a new chain, a new bridge. And ideally, you would want to introduce new foods in conjunction with each other to eventually get to your endpoint. Generally speaking, if you're changing or introducing a new food, you want to make sure you're focusing on one or two variables that you're changing. If you're changing more than three variables in one sitting, oftentimes that's too much of a jump. And again, that could tend to promote your child's anxiety. So when you're thinking about, again, building these chains, think about baby steps. What small qualities can I build off of, and how can I keep the chain going? So within the next few slides, we're just going to go over a few examples of what that might look like in respect to creating a food chain from scratch. And one of our later slides is going to have an example food chain, and I'm going to ask the attendees to see if they could bridge the chain themselves. So this is just an example of a food chaining strategy. Again, you could be creative with your approach, but this is just one way to approach the situation. So first and foremost, maintaining and expanding the current taste and texture of the food item. So again, if your child is used to having a specific brand of French fries and you want to gradually transition them to ideally a different form of potatoes or maybe a different brand in general, you would maintain the same food item, but you would switch the brand. So maybe Nathan's French fries at the start, and you want to transition them to frozen French fries from Arby's. So again, same food item, looks the same texture, same appearance, but just changing the brand, just starting to engage in the process. Step after that could be altering the taste, but maintaining the texture. So how that might play out is if your child's starting off with the regular French fries, but you want to change them to sweet potato fries, again, making sure it's the same type of fry, but the only difference is this fry is made out of sweet potato. So they're, again, familiar with the texture, the size of it, but now it's just a different color and a different taste. Again, taking baby steps. Another step after that could be maintaining the taste and adjusting the texture of the food item. So say we're at sweet potato fries from regular French fries. At this point, maybe we're considering transitioning into sweet potato cubes. So again, it's the same color, similar taste, texture might be a little different, size might be a little different, but again, we're trying to change only two variables. And to end the food chain, consider maintaining the taste, but further adjusting the texture. So since we're already transitioned from French fries to sweet potato cubes, and sweet potato cubes is the item that accepted, now we can see if we can transition into mashed sweet potatoes. So again, same color, same taste, further adjusting the texture, a lot easier to bridge that gap. So when you're looking at this process, again, you want to be very patient. It could take anywhere from 10 to 30 exposures for a chain to be complete. So essentially you're setting the stage for success and you're letting your child take that next step. After the food chain is complete, you can consider starting a new food chain, but just some strategies to make it a little more streamlined. Like say your child likes a specific condiment, so maybe they like ketchup with their fries. You can maintain that side condiment with each step of the food chain to further build familiarity and buy-in from your child. So here is a food which you all are probably very familiar with, chicken nuggets. So this is an example of how to transition from chicken nuggets to fish fillet using a food chain. So first and foremost, you want to consider starting off small. So maybe we're changing the brands of the chicken nugget. Still the same item, likely similar texture, similar taste, but just a different brand. So starting the process off. And a good transition after that could be substituting the chicken for a breaded fish fillet. So thinking about chicken nuggets and thinking about fish fillets, similar color, right? Similar texture, taste is different. Again, making small baby steps. The next step towards transitioning to a whole fish fillet could be cutting the fish fillet open and exposing the whiting of the fish to ideally better transition into a breadless fish fillet. So again, just an example of how you could approach this. So I'm going to move this to the side. Here's another example of Here's another example of a food chain. So this is using goldfish. So starting off with goldfish, if that's what your child is familiar with having, then transitioning into Cheez-Its, a completely different snack. So the step here is you have the same color, you have the same texture, you have a similar taste, but the shape is different. So the fact that we're only changing one variable makes this chain a lot more likely to be successful. The next step after that could be maintaining the texture, but we're changing the color, similar taste, similar shape from white cheddar Cheez-Its to regular cheddar, from cheddar Cheez-Its to white cheddar Cheez-Its, excuse me. Again, considering 10 to 30 exposures to the food. Step 3 again, playing off of that new color that's established, we're going with the similar color. We have a new texture, we have a new taste, but the shape is similar. So these could be cheese club crackers. Um, after that is a new established chain, we can then consider serving your child whole crackers with sliced cheese in the middle. So again, similar color, but we have a new texture, we have a new taste, we have a new shape. So as you see this whole process transitioning from goldfish, which is a specific item, now we're at a spot where your child can now be more accustomed to saltine crackers in addition to sliced cheese as a result of completing this food chain process. So now I just want to give everyone the opportunity to try out a food chain for themselves. So we're starting off with potato chips and we're getting to whole banana. So what would be the appropriate steps to take in the food chain to get to this outcome? I'll give everybody maybe 2 minutes to see what they can come up with, and maybe we could type the answers in the chat. We'll give it about 1 more minute.
So Michael, we have some that said apple slices or mashed potatoes maybe would be helpful. Veggie straws. I see a veggie straw.
Okay. So yeah, so to clarify, these are the 2 steps in the slide, and what step would go first, what step would go second. If
Oh,
that makes it a little more clear, yeah.
I got step 1 is the banana chips. Step 2 is the sliced banana.
Okay. Any other answers?
Banana chips would be step 1.
Oh yeah, I was just seeing if that was the consensus or if anybody had any other approaches to this based off of what's on the slide.
No, it looks like everyone is in saying banana chips and sliced bananas.
Okay. So if that was the answer you gave, that was correct. So if I can go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so the first step of the food chain would be banana chips. The second would be sliced banana. So potato chips to banana chips, we're maintaining the color, similar texture, similar shape, but the taste is different. So within the chain, we're only changing 1 variable. The next step would be from banana chips to sliced banana. So we're already accustomed to the new taste from the banana chips. The colors similar. The texture is a lot different. The shape is a little different. But again, we're trying to minimize the number of variables we're changing with each step. After the sliced banana is established, a good step after that would be the whole banana. So similar color, similar texture, similar taste, the shape's different. So again, if we went directly from the potato chips to the whole banana, that would likely be too big of a gap to introduce and have a new food be built into what your child is used to having. So the better we're able to break it down by step and make small baby incremental changes, it just increases the likelihood of your child accepting the new item overall. So the division of responsibility in feeding. So the process of eating, especially when you have certain goals and expectations for your child, and it's very stressful, you just want them to have a very balanced diet. It could be very stressful for both parties. So from parents to children, like that's one side of the equation. But the other side is, like we talked about before, a lot of internal challenges are going on, anxiety, stress, a lot of stimuli. So the best possible approach is setting the stage for your child to succeed, but not forcing them to make that jump, just making it easy as possible for them to make the jump themselves. So you want to avoid pressuring your child to eat. Like we mentioned with the food chaining process, the more opportunities you give for your child to try a new item and the less you rush the process, the more likely it can be successful. You want to consider letting your child be involved in the process as well. So going back to the food shopping, or if there's a specific day that they might want to have this one food item, maybe the chicken nuggets, maybe they're choosing the day of the week that's going to be the designated menu item. Again, just having them have some buy-in so they can be more invested in the process versus the parent forcing the process on the child. Again, these steps don't take time. Don't rush the process, and it will be conducive towards success if you let the process play out as it should. So key takeaways, the key priority is that your child is eating. Again, it's not always going to start off looking perfect. It might just be chicken tenders and fries for a little bit. But going back to earlier points, if your child is eating, period, if they're getting the calories they need in for growth, for optimal cognitive function, we're definitely in a good spot from that standpoint in itself. So it doesn't always have to look perfect, but it's more important for your child to eat. If you're ever concerned in the long term about certain gaps in foods that your child is having, you can always talk with your PCP or your primary care physician about possibly starting a multivitamin or a specific supplement to help bridge gaps. A very important point to consider is structure is conducive towards success. If you establish structure, if you establish familiarity and rules for meal times, all parties know what to expect. It's less anxiety inducing. It's more conducive towards just being an overall good environment. And that will translate into success with branching out with different food items being a lot more likely. And like I mentioned before, just getting your kid involved as much as possible, it just makes everything go that much more smoothly. So that'll round out the first section of our presentation. So if anybody has any questions that they want to throw out, this would be the time for the first part.
If anyone has any questions, they can just put them in the chat and then we'll continue with the presentation and allow some time after the conclusion if you do have questions.
Okay, excellent. So we'll keep it going. Okay, so I wanted to start off the second half of the presentation by asking the question, what are some challenges that the attendees experience when it comes to trying to incorporate a healthy diet? Guess we can give it about a minute or so. We have a okay. Okay, so we'll keep it going. So in my practice, these are common roadblocks that a lot of individuals that I've worked with have experienced and have created difficulty to incorporating a balanced and healthy diet. First and foremost, the idea of nutrition misinformation. So especially in America, every Friday, there's going to be a new fad diet that's being pushed to the public. And just having all this information put out and not knowing what's legitimate and what's not legitimate can be a very confusing situation. So nutrition misinformation is something I see very frequently. Another issue specifically for busy moms, but also adults in general, is just a lack of energy and time. So working full time, having outside obligations that you have to tend to, it a lot of times seems like we don't have enough time to cook, to go shopping, to do the essentials, which directly influences the quality of our nutrition. Another component is increased levels of stress. When you're thinking about how stress can translate into food choices, stress could influence food cravings. Stress could influence your cortisol levels, which have direct physiological repercussions. So based off of having us have to do everything we have to do during the week, during the day, we oftentimes can run into stress, which influences our nutrition. Another difficult component is ease of access to low nutrient dense foods. So in our convenience economy, we have so much access to anything you want. You can get delivered through an app. You could pick up something on the way back home. You have so many different food options. And a lot of these options can tend to be lower nutrient dense, which essentially means higher calories, higher in sugar, sodium, lower in essential vitamins and minerals. Another roadblock is just general familial obligations. So you might have to take your kid to soccer practice. You might have to pick up your kid from school. You might have to run errands. A lot of these tasks takes away time that could be used to prepare meals for partners and children, but also based off of like what family members like within the family unit. Some family members could like some items versus others. And if you're preparing food for people, you generally put other people's preferences over your own, which can tend to influence your overall food quality. And lastly, like I mentioned, the fad diet program. So keto, intermittent fasting, those are always a few big ones. So what areas should you focus on to optimize your health and wellness and make sure you have a balanced diet that's going to meet all your long-term health and wellness goals? One of the first things I preach is building awareness around your lifestyle and your habits. Oftentimes, since we have to put a lot of focus into completing all the different tasks that we have to do during the workday, after work during the week, it's very easy to have a lot of your goals get lost in the shuffle. So the first step to make progress towards optimizing your nutrition is understanding what your nutrition looks like, just building awareness around what your lifestyle and habits look like on paper. I like to preach consistency with small changes versus drastic changes that might give you quicker results, but results that might not necessarily be sustainable. Since we're all creatures of habit, we tend to do things that we're comfortable with, and oftentimes making small changes but focusing on consistency could make it easier to implement these changes into your nutrition for the long term. Lean proteins and fiber. Generally in America, protein isn't as of an issue. It's more so leaner proteins, so proteins that are lower calories, lower fat, and also fiber. On average, Americans get less than 12 grams of fiber per day, but for most adults, 25 to 28, low 30s, that's generally the healthy amount that one would need to get to optimize their health and wellness. More fruits and vegetables, thinking about based off what I'm having during the day, snack wise, like am I trying to get 4 to 5 servings per day? And then lastly, some non-nutritional variables that also contribute to how nutrition plays out are factors such as hydration, sleep, and stress management. And we'll go a little more depth with the slides coming. So For whoever who's not familiar with My Plate, this is essentially the USDA's replacement for the food pyramid. They found that the food pyramid was very hard for consumers to understand and break down. So this is essentially an approach that promotes balance with macronutrients, with different components that you would have to get in with your diet, but also having the approach be very digestible where it's not very difficult to understand. So the overall takeaway is when having meals, trying to get in some form of color. Color could be the form of vegetables, it could be the form of fruits, but ideally having half your plate being some type of color. Aside from vitamins and minerals, you're also getting a lot of fiber from the color on your plate. You want to consider getting a fourth from whole grains, essentially types of food that give you energy, but also fiber and vitamins versus processed carbohydrates. And lastly, you want to make sure that you're trying to incorporate some type of lean protein in equal proportions to your whole grains, and also trying to fit in at least 2 to 3 servings of low-fat dairy during the day to help get calcium and vitamin D. So all nutrients have their roles. So if you have somebody who is looking for disease prevention as a primary goal, if you have somebody who has a weight loss goal, it's very imperative that you build balance within the types of foods you're having, because every time you cut out food groups, you're just leaving yourself at room to have potential deficiencies or not to be as healthy as you could be possibly. So we're always thinking about balance and moderation. Protein being the main building block of your body, very important for muscle and bone health, recovery, and appetite regulation. Fiber has a lot of different purposes. It helps to decrease cholesterol if you're looking at soluble fiber sources. Insoluble is more so for digestive health and healthy bowel movements. Fat, ideal for carrying flavor, vitamin absorption, and also is used for a lot of hormones. With dietary fats, it's always good to think about replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats, which are ideal for cardiovascular health and decreasing cholesterol. And lastly, carbohydrates, your body's ideal source for fuel, based off of certain camps that spread information out in the media. Some people demonize carbohydrates, but at its core, carbohydrates are just a means for energy for your body. It's very quick and easy. It's something that you should incorporate, but it also shouldn't be the focus of your meals. Like you should, like we talked about before, incorporate carbohydrates in the right proportion with proteins and your fiber and your color. So here are just some sample examples of what a healthy meal could look like that's following the My Plate principle. So again, you're thinking about, am I getting lean proteins? Am I getting a good amount of color or fiber in the plate? And am I making sure to get some type of energy, ideally a whole grain? So it could be a chicken quinoa bowl. You're feeling a little creative. It could be a honey garlic chipotle salmon. If you're a big burger fan, Mediterranean turkey burger. So there's not a one size fits all approach. The main message is you're incorporating balance, color, different components to really tackle all the boxes that you have to check off in respect to a well-balanced diet. Going back to the idea of a lot of times we might not have a lot of time to prepare meals. Like it doesn't have to be a time-consuming process. It could just be a tuna sandwich with maybe sprouted bread and maybe a Greek yogurt and a piece of fruit on the side. Some other examples, you could just do a black bean quesadilla. Again, I would say most people could find 15 minutes at the end of the day to just kind of whip up something for dinner. So it could just be something as simple as this. A few other ideas. It could be as simple as a smoothie. Like maybe you don't have a lot of time to prepare breakfast. You're just getting a blender out, throwing some fruits, maybe some Greek yogurt, some chia seeds, just kind of throwing some healthy components, mixing it in, and you can even take it with you on the way to work. Another idea is just oatmeal with almond butter and berries. So again, the process doesn't have to be overly complicated or overly time consuming. It's more so, are we making these changes align with our lifestyle, and are we consistent with putting these changes into place? So making dining out work. So at some point, we won't have the opportunity to make a meal from scratch or cook at home. So we'll have to rely on foods that are outside the house. Um, I'm a big proponent of being flexible, but also making the best of the situation. So here are just a few strategies that you can employ when you're trying to make dining out work correlate with the goals that you might have for yourself. So it could be as simple as looking up the restaurant menu in advance. So nowadays, most restaurants have the nutritional information available for entrees, for sides. So if you have an idea of what you're going to have later in the day, you can always take the first step to just look it up to kind of familiarize yourself with what are the options when you get to the restaurant. I generally like to preach higher protein, higher fiber. Again, these foods are more conducive towards satiety, getting full, staying full. So when you're out having a meal at a restaurant and your main focus is to just make it as balanced as it could be, you always want to consider, am I choosing entrees higher in protein and fiber? For example, if you have the option for a burger and fries versus a sirloin steak and mashed potatoes with broccoli, the latter is a lot more balanced because we're better incorporating the different types of foods within the order. Another easy fix, picking lower calorie or calorie-free beverages. Generally, when you drink your calories, you don't feel as full as if you had those calories via food. So always thinking about having water, maybe unsweetened tea, always good options to address thirst, but also ensure that you don't have a lot of sneaky calories falling in the mix. Um, Adding sauces and condiments on the side, and if you're craving a specific appetizer, again, thinking about moderation and long-term sustainability, it could be ordering what you want and just splitting it with the party, and then having everybody have the opportunity to taste whatever you had, but also everything's more moderated from that aspect. So here's just an example of how you can approach ordering Chipotle. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with Chipotle here. So one approach is less balanced, the other approach is more balanced, but the overall takeaway is I don't have a lot of time to prepare something at home. Uh, what am I going to do to really take advantage of somebody making the food for me, but also trying to get as much balance as possible? So the second option, tortilla or a burrito with chicken, black beans, white rice, queso on the side, sour creams in the burrito with corn salsa, mild salsa chips. The second option is essentially a very high carbohydrate, moderate protein, higher fat option, which again will get you to that full spot, but also it's going to be giving you a lot of sneaky calories. But the main takeaway is you're still going to be full after having that versus the other option, a chicken bowl. Maybe you have white rice or brown rice as the base. You're throwing in a little more color with the fajita vegetables, the mild salsa. You have some black beans to add a little more color, a little more fiber and protein with an addition of sour cream. This option, a lot more balanced, more protein, more fiber, still incorporating carbohydrates, but it's not the focal point of the meal in its entirety. So hydration, according to the National Academy of Medicine, adult women specifically need about 9 cups or 72 ounces of water per day to meet the amount of water they need. Um, some symptoms of dehydration tend to be fatigue, irritability, headaches. A lot of times when you feel tired in the morning after sleeping, ideally a full 7 to 8 hours, you're waking up at the most dehydrated state throughout the day, since while you're sleeping, your body's using water that entire time, but you're not putting any more water into your body to replenish what it's using. So always a good idea to start the day off with at least 1 or 2 cups of water. what that's going to do starting the day off, but also spreading it throughout the day, is it's going to support with natural appetite regulation. Again, a lot of times when you're feeling thirsty, your body has a very hard time differentiating that from feelings of hunger. So doing a more optimal job of hydrating more regularly and optimally can a lot of times clear out some feelings of hunger, which are actually feelings of thirstiness. It's going to help out with bowel regularity, again, energy, decreased lethargy by making sure you're hydrated, and also it's linked with improved cognitive function. So essentially a lot of return you would get from focusing on hydrating enough for your body. Stress management and sleep. So a lot of people aren't aware of the link between high levels of stress, sleep deprivation, and nutrition. When you're thinking about stress and sleep deprivation, those two situations increase your body's stress hormone, which is called cortisol. When you have high levels of cortisol in your body, this hormone directly influences your satiety and your fullness hormones, ghrelin and leptin, which play a role in how full you feel after you're having your meal. So generally, if you're in a overly stressed state, if you're not getting enough sleep on average, that could generally influence how you feel as after you're finished with meals. And if that's not really addressed properly, you can also find yourself craving items more consistently, and you can find yourself a little more hungry than usual. Again, just a result of stress not being addressed and sleep not being prioritized. So very important to consider trying to get, say, it's 7 to 8 hours per night. If stress is something that you deal with constantly and it has a big influence on your overall well-being, you want to consider putting into place some form of stress management. So this could be meditation, this could be taking a walk outside, exercise, it could be reading, journaling, essentially anything that you enjoy that you think you can employ consistently, but also could help you control your stress levels. Again, easier said than done, like especially if you have children who have a lot of needs and require a lot of time. Again, it's very difficult for you to prioritize your own self-care over your children's self-care. But also considering that when you prioritize your own self-care, you can show up that much better the next day because you're just taking care of yourself and the essentials and just making sure you're doing everything possible that you can. So going back to the approach that I generally recommend for adults, we're looking at a lifestyle approach versus extreme dieting. Again, we have a big issue in America with promoting extreme changes, one-size-fits-all approaches, which generally promise results, which a lot of people are craving, but those results often are short-lived. So an easy way to ensure that your diet's as balanced as possible, you're making a lot of progress towards your long-term health and wellness goals. This is just the small things you could consider doing more often during the day. So based off of what you're drinking currently, can you fit in a little more water? Can I fit in a little more water at the end of the day or when I'm waking up? Am I prioritizing eating consistently? So am I having 3 meals, even if they're smaller meals, versus only 1 meal a day and snacking periodically? Am I thinking about making a small addition, such as adding a piece of fruit, or maybe adding a little more protein with my breakfast to create that balance and that satiety? Again, thinking about everything from a holistic perspective, avoiding extreme changes and pushing more small changes that, if done consistently and if they're more incorporated into your lifestyle, they'll create the lasting results that you're looking for. So key takeaways for moms: you want to give yourself grace. This is a very hard job, right? And it's very time consuming. So it's not something you should beat yourself up over, but also you should also strategize to find it to be as streamlined as possible. Whether it's the food chaining process, whether it's some strategies to make mealtime a little more accessible for children, just giving yourself grace and patience overall. You want to find ways to optimize hydration. Again, it's such a simple fix, just drinking more water. It could be as easy as getting a 1 liter water bottle and you just have it on your desk, and just the fact that you have it in front of you increases the likelihood of you increasing the amount of water you're drinking. Just being creative of hydrating better because you're going to thank yourself for it later. We want to think about finding ways to prioritize sleep, finding ways to limit stress, because what this comes back to is just recovery, taking care of ourselves very well, but also making sure we have enough energy to show up as strong as possible. We want to think about having more variety in your meals and snacks. So going throughout the day, am I having different food groups? Do I have different colors on my plate? Do I have different nutrients? Again, you're never going to go wrong with having more variety versus having a limited amount of foods that you have on a consistent basis. And lastly, integrating small healthy changes into your lifestyle versus going for bad diets that are going to promise big changes, big results, but results that aren't going to be sustainable for the long term. So now I just want to open up for any other questions that any of the attendees might have regarding any of these topics we discussed today.
Great presentation. Thank you so much, Michael. I did send a message. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please share them in the chat at this time. We do have about 7 minutes left of the Zoom presentation. So if you do have any questions, we'd like to take this opportunity to answer them now. If you do have any other questions that, following the presentation today, like we mentioned, we will be sharing them with all of our participants, hopefully by this afternoon. Also with Michael's contact information here at Wood Services, along with my contact information if you have any questions or comments or feedback that you want to share post webinar today. So it looks like we don't have any questions at this time. Again, we want to thank everyone for attending today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for coming.